We are going to finish the fifth parak today. Let's go. We are at Samachem Beis, second paragraph or third paragraph on the first column of 65b1. Tanya, we have a dialogue between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham. Again, Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that at the end of the avoda on Erev Pesach, what they would do is they would take a cup, they would take a bowl, they would put it into the blood that was gathered, and then throw it against the mizbeach as a way of making sure that anyone whose blood was spilled would be covered. Now, the Rabbi Yehuda said this view based on his view of bittul. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda held that when you have two types of blood, one type of blood is not mevatel the other type of blood. The Chachamim clearly hold that no, there's no significance in throwing the blood because the blood that would be significant was nullified by the blood of the drainage blood, and therefore there is no blood over here. But now the Gemara goes a little bit further into the dialogue between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. So let's see. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda the Chachamim. L'divreichem, according to you, lama pokinas azara. Why we know that on Erev Pesach they would close up, they would block the drainage pipe and basically allow the azara to get filled. So he says, what were they doing? If they weren't doing it for this reason of giving us the Kohanim an opportunity to gather and throw the blood, then why else would they be blocking the drainage pipe? It doesn't make any sense. In other words, the reason you have a drainage pipe is to take the blood out. Why would they want to have blood going up on Erev Pesach? The only reason he says I could come up with is for my reason, which is that they wanted to take a bowl of blood and sprinkle it. That's the reason they must be doing it. Okay, so Amar Lo, the Chacham said no. The reason they did it was Shevachu Livnei Aharon Sheyelchu Al Arkuad Arkubosehem B'dam. It was as a praise, a credit to the sons of Aaron, meaning the Kohanim. They would walk in blood up to their knees. In other words, it was meant to show, I know this may sound a little, different, but it was meant to show their love for the mitzvah, and basically they're walking through they deliberately wanted the blood to accumulate to show how much the Kohanim love the avoda and love the Beis Hamikdash and love the sacrifices, and therefore they allowed the blood to accumulate, not because of a halachic reason of scooping up the blood and pouring it against the wall, like Rabbi Yehuda argues, but rather to demonstrate their love. Simcha Gross showed me a little video, which I'll try to remember just forward, that MDY made of the Kohanim like sloshing through blood, using digital whatever. So if you for the not faint of heart, I'll share with you later. But the point is, it's a covet. Ask the Gemara. Wait a second.
This is a strange point.
What do you mean?
What's gained by that?
There's nothing in. It's
the point of doing this blood process. The korbanot, it's not in their own sake. It's because it represents. So
Correct, but showing, you see, you can imagine, the imagery of, wow, this is so intense. There's something, on the contrary, it's something which is meant to not shock you, but, wow, there's so much going on over here. There's so much, look at all the intensity, right? There's just so much happening over here, and that shows that their love for what they're doing. It shows, it just adds some grandeur to the whole scene. Okay, Valkachait, ask Gemara, wait, there's a technical problem, and that is, the Kohanim have to walk on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, and the blood is going to be a chatzitza. So the Gemara says, no, lachu ve'ena chotze. It's blood that is wet does not make a chatzitza. Kedetanya dam v'adio v'achal v'advash. When it comes to blood, ink, milk, and honey, yiveshem chotzen. If it's dried up, then it acts as a chatzitza. Then it's interposition. Lachin in chotzen. But if they're still wet, then there is no interposition. Okay, so that's not a problem. Ask the Gemara, but wait a second, another problem. V'kamitavze manayu. Their clothing is going to become dirty. Okay, they're going to walk through blood. Their clothing is going to become dirty. If it's time to start on a brayso, if a Kohen's garments were soiled and he performed the avoda, avodas psula. His entire voda is invalid. So how can he be sloshing through blood? The me'il, the cloak they wear goes down to the floor, base goes down to their ankles, and therefore there's going to be a problem. So the Gemara says, maybe you'll tell me that they lifted up their garments. Okay, that can't be. Titania midovad. The pasuk says the Kohanim shall put on his fitted linen tunic. Mido kimidaso. It has to be according to his size. Shlo yachsev lo yoser. That it has to be neither too short nor too long. In case they had tailors making sure that their clothing was the exact fit. But you see from there as well that the point is that you're not allowed to go ahead and lift it up. It has to be properly fitting. It would be a chisaron in mido and from the word fitted, right? It has to have that fitted look. And if the Kohen's walking around holding on to the bottom of his tunic, it's not an appropriate look. So that can't be. So the Gemara says, "Bo lachas ivaron lekevesh." The Gemara says, "Okay, don't worry. We're talking about conveying the limbs to the Mizbeach, de lav avodahi, which the Gemara wants to suggest that would not be an integral, that's not really called avoda. Okay, the Gemara is going to reject this in a moment, but the assumption is that the bringing of the limbs to the ramp is a lesser part in the entire service, and therefore that was the part that was done. Yes, he lifted up his clothing at that point, but since it wasn't since it wasn't an integral part of the avoda, therefore it's allowed. Okay, velo, and that's where Tommy walks the blood when he's bringing it to the ramp. Ask the Gemara, velo, if that's not a part of the avoda, the fact that it has to be done by the kohanim, avodahi, even taking the limbs to the ramp, that is also part of the avoda. The Tanya says in the Brisa, quoting a pasuk, v'kriva kohen esakol hamizbecha. The kohen has to bring everything to the mizbeach. Zo halacha sevarim lakevish. This is referring to conveying the limbs to the ramp, so that is part of the avoda. So the Gemara says, we're talking about carrying the wood up the ramp to bring it onto the fire. Okay, and that's when the Kohen would walk through the blood, and that's when he would lift up his tunic, and therefore he didn't get it dirty, but it's okay that he lifted it up because he wasn't doing avoda then. The Gemara says, wait, a question which I imagine was on some of your minds. If there's blood in the courtyard, but it doesn't only come around the person carrying the wood, right? In other words, I don't know what's going on. At the end of the day, if there's blood in the courtyard, it's going to be there when he's bringing the stuff to the ramp. It's going to be there when they sprinkle the blood. So you can't blood only when you bring wood to the fire. That makes no sense. If there's blood, there's blood. So the Gemara says, no. Gemara says something fascinating, and that is that they walked on platforms for most of the avoda, that they would set up platforms around the base of Mikdash. The Mefarshim asked, wait a second, you're not allowed to add on to the base of Mikdash. They said, it's halach l'moshe misinai, clearly. There's no other way to understand how they could have done so. But there were platforms that were raised, and therefore for the sprinkling of the blood, for the walking of the limbs, anything that was avoda, they'd walk on the platforms and not walk through the blood. So it's almost like, imagine a bloody Venice, okay? So basically they're walking through these canals of blood around them, and they would walk on these bridges. When it comes to part of it, it's like bringing the wood up which is not part of the avoda, then they would slosh through the blood, and again, demonstrating their love for the avoda.
I'm confused with something. It says here that when they did the avoda, it was knee-high in blood, but you had drains.
No, that's what we started off with. Everyone agrees they blocked the drain on Erev Pesach.
Knee-high in blood? The temple is gigantic. It's humongous.
Yeah, but as we spoke about the other day, we said there were double the amount of, there were at least 1.2 million animals being slaughtered. Obviously there was a busy Erev Pesach, but the point is, there are also a lot of animals. Okay.
Good point.
Yeah. Okay. Keitzad Tolam Avshita, the Mishnah, final part of the Mishnah, or final parts of the Mishnah, it says that they would suspend and flay the animal, basically hold up the animal and they'd flay the hides. Karav Otzias Marav, so it goes into a little more detail. They tore it open and removed its sacrificial parts, right? There were parts that had to go onto the Mizbech, were taken out. Nesan B'Megas Viktiran, he would put them in a bowl and burn them. So Gemara asks, who Gufe Havamakjale? The person who took them out, they're the ones who burnt them. The person who took them out is the Yisrael. Right? In other words, when they flay it, that's being done. That's not being done by the Kohanim. That's being done by the rest of us. And it says they took out the innards and burnt them on the Mizbech. I can't burn something on the Mizbech, only the Kohanim can. So Gemara says, Ema lehaktir l'gam Mizbech. Doesn't mean that the person took them out, the non-Kohen put them in the bowl, and then put them on the Mizbech, but he put them in the bowl in order that a Kohen would burn them on the Mizbech. And the way Rashi sounds like he says is that basically they would have these bowls everywhere, people would put their emurim, people would put the sacrificial parts there, and the Kohanim would walk around, picking them up, and bringing them to the Mizbech, right? It didn't have the same fireman brigade for the emurim because it was only the blood that couldn't congeal, so that's why they had to go so quickly. The emurim they would leave there, and Kohanim would be doing sweeps through the base of Mikdash, picking up these bowls filled with the innards, the sacrificial parts that go on the Mizbech, take them to the Mizbech, and put them onto the fire. Okay, says the Mishnah, the final line of the Mishnah, Yatzik Has Rishona. So again, the first group went out, and then the second group went out, the third group went out, but now it just describes how do they leave the base of Mikdash. Tanu San and Brisa called Echad Echad Nosim Pischa Ba'oro Umavshel Acharav. They would use its hide, right? They would skin it, but then they would use the hide as a bag, right? Look at this, economical thing over here. How do they carry the animal? So they'd skin it, and then it seems, I don't know, about the hide, but basically it seems like, if it was done well, then it's all one. Basically, it's a hide which could be used as a bag. They put the animal there, and then they'd use the hide. They carry it over their back. Okay, says Rav Ila Ilish. Amar Rav Elish, Tayaus, this was done like Arab merchants. Why does it have to tell us it was done like Arab merchants? The Mefarshim explain that even though this would be like a degrading way of walking around, normally, dignified people don't walk around something over their back, but since it was for a mitzvah, it's seen as dignified, right? If you're doing something for a mitzvah, even if it looks silly, it's seen as dignified. I think, I'm not sure, there's a different share. Recently, like they say, Soloveitchik was once walking in Boston one day, and he was on his way to Shabbos Shir, his hat blew off, and it got all dirty, and he put it back on his head, and he was with one of Talmidim. He said, it's bizayon, your hat's all dirty, how can you do this? He said, it might be a bizayon for me, but it's covered Shabbos. This is my dirt is covered Shabbos, right? Sometimes when I do something, right, you're not allowed to clean things on Shabbos. So he says, me doing this, or holding back from cleaning, that is a covered for Shabbos. Yeah, when you follow the halacha, even though sometimes it may look, whatever, the fact that I'm doing this is actually shows the greatest respect. So here too, they might not be acting in the most respectful way, but that is the covered for the mitzvah. Okay, that's what we need to think about, even though sometimes mitzvahs don't, it might look a little funny, but that is actually a covered for the mitzvah. We finished this chapter, and now we're going to begin a new chapter, the 6th chapter, that talks about things that override Shabbos as it relates to Korban Pesach. We'll take some of these halachos and apply it to halachos that do not pertain to Korban Pesach. But first, we're going to go through a interesting Mishnah, a bit of a dialogue about which things could be doche Shabbos, and it has relevance to other practical halachos as well, that are practical, meaning that we have in this day and age. Elud Varam, Shabbos. These are things that on Pesach or Erev Pesach would override Shabbos. Okay, so meaning if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, these are the things you could do, right? It happens sometimes, Erev Pesach Shabbos. So, you and I are wondering about, like, when do we eat our 3 meals, etc., etc. For them, it was so much more complicated. There's a lot more they were doing in Erev Pesach. They were slaughtering, as we're about to see, they were slaughtering the Korban Pesach. So let's see. Shchitaso, it's slaughter. That can be done on Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach. Uzrikas damo, then they would sprinkle the blood. That has to be done on Shabbos. Umicho kravav, the cleaning out of the intestines. In other words, when you slaughter an animal, its intestines are oftentimes filled with, like, excrements, with waste. So you have to clean that out before bringing it onto the Mizbeach. That would also be done on Shabbos. Vaktaras chalavav, and the burning of the fats, those things are all done on Shabbos. And those are things which cannot be done before Shabbos, and they can't be postponed until after Shabbos. Therefore, they can be done on Shabbos itself. Avatzli yaso, the roasting of the animal, vadachas kravav, and the rinsing of its intestines. In other words, even after they took out all the waste, there's some dirt in the intestine. I mean, there's still some residue there, so they would rinse it out. Those could be done after Shabbos, and therefore, einan dochas Shabbos, they don't override Shabbos. So anything that could be pushed off till after, you would do after. Hakavaso, the carrying of the
This is Shabbos that is Erev.
Shabbos is Erev Pesach, correct. So they're sacrificing the Korban Pesach, but whatever could be pushed off till after, they're going to push off till after. The cooking, we don't need to eat the animal until that night, so you wait, and they roasted it Motzei Shabbos. Opposed to on a regular weekday, they'd roast it during the day. Here they'd roast it Motzei Shabbos, and they would rinse out the last parts of the dirt from it. Okay, Hakavaso, carrying the animal back home, and let's say you left your animal, we're now in Samachem, base 65b5, okay? Let's say you left your animal, let's say it's Erev Pesach, again, which is Shabbos, and you forgot your Korban Pesach outside the Tchum. So to bring your animal outside the Tchum, since we know Erevin so well, obviously it is Asur, can't be done, okay? V'chatichas yabalto. Let's say it has a wart that would invalidate it from being a karban. So certain warts could be cut off, and which would validate it as a karban, but that should have been done, both taking it from outside the tchum and cutting off the wart should have been done when? Before Shabbos. The fact that, right, there's no problem, if you have an animal, Korban Pesach, which has a wart, right? You don't have to do that on Erev Pesach, you should have done that beforehand. Or let's say you should have brought your animal from outside the tchum and brought it inside the tchum. There's no reason that you had to do that on Shabbos itself. And therefore, ein dochlis Shabbos, it does not override Shabbos. Anything which could have been done before Shabbos began, you cannot do on Shabbos. Says Rabbi Eliezer Omer Dochin. He says, no, even those things do override Shabbos. Okay, and Rabbi Eliezer tries to brings a proof to this. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer holds that even things which are preliminary, even things which could have been done before Shabbos, they should be able to override Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer, I'll prove it to you logically. Slaughtering, which is a full-fledged prohibition on Shabbos, dochas Shabbos to override Shabbos. So elu, these acts, mishum shvus, cutting off the wart and bring something from beyond the tchum. Those are things which are rabbinic. So lo yichlas Shabbos, for sure, they should override Shabbos. In other words, that's his logical argument. If slaughtering, which is biblical, override Shabbos, so these things which are rabbinic, they should for sure override Shabbos. Amar lo Yeshua, Yeshua responds to him, Yom Tov Yichiach. I'll prove to you you're wrong from the regular laws of Yom Tov. Shetir bo mishum malacha. You're allowed to do malacha. If let's say on Yom Tov you have a deer in your backyard. Okay, someone here, Rabbi Tzvi Holland, once got a deer stuck in his he's a bit of a meat connoisseur, and he got a deer stuck in his shed. So he quickly went, and he's also a shochet. I don't know if you can legally do this or whatever, but he slaughtered in his backyard, and he had a deer for a little while. I don't know, my daughter was there, said it was great. Anyway, the bottom line is, so if you have a deer stuck in your backyard on Yom Tov, and you want to slaughter it, by all means, you can do so, 100% mutter. So you're allowed to slaughter, which is doraisa on Shabbos, but if it's something which is rabbinic, let's say you have something outside the tchum, which is not relevant to you on Shabbos. It's whatever, it's something to you on Yom Tov. It's some book which you're not using on Yom Tov. You are not allowed to carry it from outside the tchum. So you see, there are biblical things which are allowed, but that doesn't necessarily tell me rabbinic things are allowed. Rabbi Eliezer's whole svara was, oh look, since a doraisa is allowed, so it's a rabbinic law is allowed. That's not true. We have doraisas which are allowed on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, and we do not have rabbinic things which are allowed on Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer, Mazi Yoshua, what are you talking about? Ma raya is just the mitzvah. He says, what comparison are you making over here? I'm talking about Korban Pesach, which is a mitzvah. You're talking about bringing a book, which is just something you want to read. There's no comparison, and therefore, that's not a proof. So, Heish Rabbi Kiva Amar, so Rabbi Kiva comes along and he tries to disprove Rabbi Eliezer. He says, Hazat Tochiach, sprinkling required to purify a person from being tamei, which, let's say, a person's last day of Tumah falls out on Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach, and they have to sprinkling on the person. So he says which is Shehi Mishum Mitzvah, that enables a person to bring the Korban Pesach, Vi Mishum Shvus, okay, and it would be forbidden rabbinically. It's a part of Misakin, fixing something, it's forbidden rabbinically. Ve'ena Dorchas Shabbos, 65b6, and it does not override Shabbos, right? So you see something which is rabbinic, and it's being done for a mitzvah, and yet it doesn't override Shabbos. Af atal tisma elu. So therefore, don't be amazed by these things. Af bi shem mishum mitzvah, even though they are a mitzvah. Ve'em mishum shvus, and they are rabbinically prohibited. In other words, carrying the karban from outside the tchum, or things, or cutting off the abel stroll rabbinic, but help you do the mitzvah. Li'chas Shabbos and override Shabbos. Again, just like Hazah does not override Shabbos. Amar Rabbi says no. He says va'aleh nidan. He says regarding sprinkling, I argue with that. He says I disagree. You can't bring a proof from there because I actually agree with you. I disagree with you about the sprinkling. Shehi mishum malacha. So umayim shchita, and for the following reason: if slaughtering shehi mishum malacha, which is forbidden because it's a full-fledged malacha, doches a Shabbos, it overrides Shabbos. Hazav sprinkling shehi mishum shvus, which is rabbinic, eno din doches a Shabbos. So for sure, sprinkling should override Shabbos. Okay, so says Rabbi Kiva 6681. Amar Rabbi Kiva. Oh, Chiluf, maybe you're completely wrong. Mayim hazah shehi mishum shvus. What about sprinkling, which is rabbinic? Eino dochas Shabbos. I say it does not override Shabbos, and therefore shchita shemishum malacha, slaughtering, which is a full-fledged malacha, eino din shlo titchas Shabbos. Okay, this is a setup. Rabbi Kiva is very clever. Basically, Rabbi Kiva says, I'll prove to you logically if sprinkling, which is rabbinic, right? Who says that overrides Shabbos? It does not. He says, and therefore shchita, which is biblical, doraisa, for sure shouldn't override Shabbos. And he says, prove to me that slaughtering overrides Shabbos when a Shabbos falls out on Erev Pesach. We're going to see. Rabbi Eliezer is going to show him a source that will tell us that slaughtering does override Shabbos, and using that source, he's actually going to try to prove Rabbi Eliezer wrong, but we'll have to wait with your intense suspense until tomorrow. Have a great day.